In this video, we'll create a HTML5 and CSS3 flat responsive Flexbox grid website. Alright guys, so let's take a look at the design before we start laying out our website here. So at the top of the website we have our Flexi logo followed by the full screen navigation, and in just a minute we'll get to the mobile version. Then we have this great big full screen image with the clouds and kite, followed by some text and some more images. So as we scroll down through the page, you're going to see the Flexbox grid really take its form when we have kind of that stair section with the images getting larger. So we're going to learn a good bit about Flexbox grid in this video and how we can create really cool layouts with very little CSS. Alright, so let's scroll back up, and then I want to show you how the Flexbox grid sections change their form as we scroll it down. But first, let me get it to a full screen width here. So as we scroll it down, you're going to see that these grid sections are going to change their form into the mobile version, and then we have the images changing to circles here rather than being squares. So there's a lot of color here, a lot of images, so it's kind of a fun layout. And let's take a look at the mobile version now for how it's going to look on the iPhone 7 on the right. So let's check out the mobile version here with the drop-down navigation, and you'll see that we have the same color as we hover over our list items here for our navigation as we do with the full screen. And later in the video I'm going to show you how you can change these colors yourself. So you may have noticed that our logo, the text, the images, and all the rest are sized down in the mobile version, which we're going to use CSS media queries for later, in addition to using the Flexbox grid layout. Alright, so let's scroll back up and then we'll go ahead and get started. Alright, so the one thing that we'll need to get started with the tutorial are the tutorial starter files. So in the description of this video will be a link to my website where you can download these starter files. So if you need to, just pause the video for a moment so you can go get the starter files, and then we'll get started. So once you open up the starter files, you'll find that we have index.html and style.css to get us started. So I'm going to be using Sublime Text as my text editor. You can also use some other programs such as Atom or Brackets, and make sure you have index.html and style.css open in your text editor, as well as index.html open in your web browser. So I'm just using Google Chrome here, but any modern web browser will do. So now let me navigate over to Sublime Text and we'll go over the starter files in detail here so we know what we're starting with. So starting from the top of the document, we've got our doc type HTML followed by our HTML tag, which spans the entire document. Then we have our head section, which tells the browser all of the important information it needs to display our website, such as the Medicare set UTF-8 tag for our characters, our title of the website that's going to show up at the top of Google Chrome, our with device with initial scale 1 tag for mobile devices. Then here we have style.css, and then our CSS folder containing font awesome and our navigation CSS files. So font awesome is going to be for our social media icons. The nav.css is obviously for our navigation, and then the cloudflare.com normalize min CSS file is going to also be for our navigation to display the font type that we'll be using. So now let's go ahead and get started by dropping down into the body section of the website where we're going to lay out all of our content. So let's get started with a div class wrapper, which is going to span the whole page just with the body section here. So I'm going to create a quick note in HTML saying that this is the end of our wrapper, since it's going to be all the way at the bottom of the page by the time we're finished laying out the website. So again, let's just call this div class wrapper, and then we'll get started with the head section. So I'm going to be going back and forth from the finished version to the version that we're working on so we know what we're laying out in detail here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to lay out the section that's just above the navigation. So we're going to call it a header section, but we're going to use a number of divs or dividers here so we can use little CSS as we do our Flexbox grid layout. So let's go ahead and create a row, which is essential with Flexbox grid. So we're going to call this div class row, and then we're just going to give it an ID of header. Okay, and then go ahead and drop down, and we're going to give this div class row a column. So it's going to be div class, and we're going to call it col, short for column, dash 12. Okay, and then drop down, and I'll explain the columns in just a second. First, let's go ahead and lay out the image for our logo. So if we go back to the starter files, inside of our image or IMG folder, we'll see the image file name for our logo here, and that's going to be image source, and then the file is img / for the image folder flexi-logo.png. And then we're also going to give our image here for the logo a class, and we'll call it logo. Okay, and then let's go ahead and just drop down and line up our divs, the closing tags for our divs, for the column and the row for our Flexbox layout. Okay, so now that we have our logo added, let's go ahead and refresh the page that we're working on here, and there we have the Flexi logo displaying as the first bit of our content here in Google Chrome. So now let's go back, and I want to do a quick explanation of our Flexbox grid columns before we move on through the tutorial, and then you'll get a much better feel for it as we lay out the CSS. So here we have Flexbox column 12. So that's going to be the widest of the columns. So basically we have a row, and inside of that we have the possibility of 12 columns. So if we divide 12 or 100 by 12 rather, we get 8.33 and so on. So just imagine the navigation, which has 6 columns, which would be 16.666 and so on, being 2 rows. So if we had 12 navigation items, that would be the equivalent of 1 Flexbox row. So we could have up to 12 columns on the page here. So we're not going to use all 12 up in this tutorial, but with the layout that you're given with the tutorial, after we do the CSS, you'll see that you can have the 12 and work with it to customize the website as your very own. So now let's go ahead and let's lay out the info for our navigation. So what we'll do is let's drop down and let's add another div class row for our Flexbox layout, and then we'll add, since it's a full width column, we want it to be div class col 12. Okay, so now let's drop down and let's get started with our navigation. So what we're going to start with is nav role navigation, and nav role, for those of you who are unfamiliar with, will allow for more accessibility with HTML5, and we're going to give this an ID of nav. Okay, now let's drop down, and we're going to add an input for this and a label, and then later in a couple of minutes I'm going to show you how you can change the appearance of the navigation, since the CSS is already laid out for us in nav.css. Okay, so go ahead and write input class. So it's input class trigger, and then the type is going to be a checkbox. So this is going to trigger the mobile navigation, and then we're going to give it an ID of main, capital N for nav, capital B for button, and then we're going to give it a label. So we're going to have label for the ID of main nav button on click, and then close your input, or sorry, your label bracket, and then menu, and then close the label tag. Okay. So now let's go back and let's add our unordered list for our navigation, and then the list items will start to appear on the version that we're working on. So underneath the UL, write LI, and inside of our list item we'll have a link. So it's ahref. And I'm not going to send the links to anywhere right now, so I'm just going to put a hashtag here. So that's just going to keep us on the same page rather than sending us elsewhere. But what you'd want to do is just write, say, for example, home or index.html for our home navigation link, and then aboutus.html, for example, for the next one, when you're creating a navigation linking to other pages of the website. Okay, so now let's write about us, and then we'll just lay out the rest of our list items here. So li ahref, and then write products. Okay, and then the fourth one, li ahref, is blog. And then the fifth is specials, and feel free to copy and paste your list items and links here. And then the sixth is contact us. Alright, so now let's go ahead and refresh the page that we've been working on, and I want to show you really quickly, once we do, where you can change the color of the navigation. Okay, so if we refresh, here we have our navigation laid out for us already, and if we flex the website down, it's going to take the mobile form already for us. So there we have the menu text that we're seeing there from the label that we created, and we have the icon for the drop-down menu. So if we go into the CSS folder and then open up nav.css, let me just show you really quickly where you can change the colors. So here we have under navul lia the background color of the navigation, and then the hover color right here. So this navigation, I'll put a link to the original navigation in the description of the video, so you can check it out. And now let's drop down and let's create the next div class row, which is going to be for the kite image here with the clouds. So this, similar to the rows that we've been creating with the column 12, we're going to do the same thing here. Since it takes up 100% of the screen, we'll use the widest column that we have. So that's going to be div class equals col-12. Okay, and then I'm just going to do the image here for the kite. So we're in the image folder, and then it's /kite.png. Alright, so now if we go ahead and refresh the page that we're working on, we're going to see a gigantic image here for that kite with the clouds, which later will size down so it only and always takes up 100% of the screen, as we see here and in the mobile version. Okay, so let's move down beneath the kite image and do another row and column for our text here, where it says welcome to Flexi. So I'm going to write div class row, and we're also going to have this the widest it can be. So we'll do div class column -12, and then I'm going to add our heading 2 text here, which is welcome to Flexi! Exclamation point. So for this heading class, we're going to give it a class that's H2 dark. So throughout the website here, we have the dark text and the light text. So the dark text is going to show up twice for us, and the light text is going to show up several times. So what we'll do is a class for the dark text. So we're just going to call this H2 class equals dark. And then later we'll style that to have the hex value that's kind of that dark blue color that we're seeing there with the welcome to Flexi text. Alright, so now let's drop down, and what we're also going to do is let's add some padding here, or let's do the image beneath that first, and then we'll add a little bit of padding to our text section above it. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy the row and column 12 with the image here, so we can add the paper airplane and plane shadow image here, which the URL for or extension is image/paper. And then let's add that padding here to the heading 2 text. So I'm just going to add a 2% padding to create a little bit of space above and beneath the welcome to Flexi text. Okay, so that's going to space it out a little more. And then let's also add some space to the row here and a background color for the paper airplane image with the image shadow underneath. So we're going to make it the background color, which is the same as the background of the image. And we're going to do this throughout the design here, a little bit of internal background color. So we don't have to create a number of different classes for each background color that we create in the CSS. So let me just show you really quickly why we're adding the background color. So this is going to create a really smooth transition down to the images that are underneath, so we don't have any separation between that plain taking off image and the blue background for the paper airplane and plain shadow. So let's also just create a little bit of padding on top of and beneath the actual airplanes that we're seeing here, so we can have more of that great blue background showing up for us. So let's do a padding of 5% on the top, 0 on the right, and then 3% on the bottom. Okay, and now if we go and refresh, it's going to look a little bit off right here because that's outside of the page when we refresh it. But once we add our CSS to make the images the max width of 100%, we're going to see some nice padding there. So let's move down and do the get ready for takeoff section next. So this is where we're going to start to use some of that Flexbox grid responsive styling with the columns, with using multiple columns per row. So go ahead and add another div class row, and then we're going to add a column here, and we're going to give this div class column 11 rather than column 12. Okay, and then we can drop down and let's go ahead and add our heading 2 text where it says get ready for takeoff. So this isn't the dark text, which means we won't need to add a class for our heading text. So just go ahead and write get ready for takeoff! Exclamation point. Alright, and then drop down and we'll stay within the same row, but what we're going to do to add the airplane taking off image next to it is we're going to add another div class column. So I'm just going to create the background color here, which is going to be the orange color, and that's the hex value F6931E. Alright, so now we can drop down, and if we refresh it, we should have there we have our H2 text with the background color in orange. And now let's add the column for our takeoff airplane image here in the blue. So just drop down and stay within the same div class row, but add a new div class column, and this will be div class col3. Okay. And then we'll do image takeoff.png. So the div class columns don't have to add up to 12. So this will be interesting once we get to the CSS and we experiment with the different Flexbox grid sections leading up to the full width at 12, and how we're going to create kind of the the stairway that's going down in the opposite direction with the images. So now let's drop down and let's do the next section, which is we're flying around the globe. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cheat a little bit and copy and paste this. So all we have to do is change the background color to the green shade, which is 1A, BC, 9C. And then let's change our heading 2 text here to we're flying around the globe. And then we'll also change the image, which is going to be the orange globe image underneath it. So we'll just change this to image/orange globe or orange-globe.png. So now if we refresh, we'll have our we're flying around the globe text there with the green background and our orange image. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the same for the next section. The only difference here is we're going to obviously change the background color, and the hex value will be E5, EF, 3F. And we're going to change the heading 2 class to the dark class, in addition to changing the text to above the clouds and over the sea. So above the clouds and amp over the sea. And we'll give this heading 2 class the class of dark, since it's the dark text or color. And then let's change this image, and this one is simply waves.png. Okay, and then if we refresh, similar to the last two, there we have our above the clouds text and our wave image. Okay, so we have two more to do here. So I'm just going to paste again our section, and later we're going to change the columns once we're doing the CSS. So it creates again that stair appearance. So the background color for the blue here is 34495E, and then we'll write in just 42 hours and 27 minutes, which I looked it up and I think that's the world record for flying around the world. And they had to stop once, to my knowledge. Anyways, the next image is the plane right here, so that's going to be simply plane.png, and then we'll do this last one, which is so come along for the ride. Alright, so we'll change the hex value here to 00AFE1, and then write so come along for the ride. And then the image here is paper-blue. So paper-blue.png. Alright, so now we have all of our sections here laid out with the two different columns. And as I said, later on we're going to change these column sizes to create the stairway type section. And one thing that we'll also do here, so we don't have to do it later when we're styling it for the mobile version, is we're going to go ahead and create a class for these circular images here for how it changes its shape once it sizes down to the mobile version. So what we'll do is we'll go back to the images inside of our column 3s here, and we're just going to give these images a class of circle. So starting with the takeoff image, you can just copy the class circle and paste it to all of the images that we have beneath here, all the way down to the paper-blue image. So again, later on we're going to give it a mobile style, so the image will change to a circle as we size the website down. Alright, so now let's go ahead and let's add this great big blue plain taking off image beneath it. So what we'll do is we're going to create another div class row. So go ahead and write div class row, and then div class col12, and then we'll give it the image, which is plain or img/plain dash background. And then we're also going to give this a background color, which is going to be the light blue color that we're seeing for the follow us text, or behind the follow us text. Okay, so I'm going to drop these divs down so they line up properly. And let's go ahead and refresh. And it's going to be a lot larger than the screen that we have here, the screen width. Okay, so next we can drop down and add our follow us section. So let's do another div class row, and then we'll give this a column of 12, div class col12. And then we'll drop down and we'll create a heading 2 text or tag and just write follow us. Alright, and then beneath that we can move down to our social media links in just a moment. So let's go ahead and give it the background color, the light blue background color here. So we'll go with style equals background color, and the hex value for this is 66D4FF. Okay, so now let's drop down and let's start our social media section. So there we have our background color. And later on I'm going to show you how you can change the hover color here also with the social media links. So I'm just going to copy this div class row and div class column 12, and then let's remove our heading 2 text, and we'll start with a unordered list. So write UL, and we're going to give this unordered list a class of social. Okay, and then drop down and we'll add our list items per social media link. So we're going with our list item, then our link, and I'm going to leave it blank for right now, but ideally you'll want to link to your social media page here. If you wanted to check mine out, I'll put them in the link, or I'll link them in the video description. And then we'll do inside of the link an I class for our font awesome icons. So the first is FA-Facebook, and then close out the I class. So the I class doesn't actually stand for icon, it's for italics, but Font Awesome uses the I class for their icons here. So if we refresh, there we have our first icon there, which is the Facebook icon. Alright, so now let's go ahead and add the rest of our social icons here. So I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm just going to copy and paste this a couple of times, and then we'll change the icon or I class per social media outlet. So the second one is going to be Google Plus. So write Google dash plus. The third we have Twitter. And then the fourth we have YouTube, with the fifth being Instagram. Okay, so let's go back to the version we're working on and refresh. And there we have our social links. So they're a little off here. That's my mistake. We actually don't need a closing unordered list tag after every one of these. We only need it after the last one. So you can go ahead and get rid of that if you added the unordered list closing tag there when you copy and pasted it. So now we have it lining up nicely. And what we can do next is let's drop down and we'll add the last little section of the website here, which is going to be what's called a socket of a website, where we have the copyright symbol for the Flexi website. So go ahead and create another div class row, and then we'll drop down and give this or let's add some style. So we're going to do all internal style for this, which is pretty simple. So we're going to give it a background color, which is that dark blue background 34495E, and then we'll just give it the border on the top. So write border dash top. It's going to be 2 pixels in width, and then write solid, and the hex value for that orange color that we used before is F6931E. Okay, and then we can drop down and let's add our div class col12, and inside of that all we need is our paragraph text for the copyright symbol and Flexi text here. So do the P tag for paragraph, open and close, and then ampersand, copy, semicolon, Flexi, period. Okay, so now when we refresh, there we have the start of our socket here with it already being colored. Okay, so we've got a lot of images, a lot of background color laid out, and thankfully we are ready to move over to our CSS. So I'm just going to get rid of a little bit of the extra space here in our HTML document, and then we can move over to style.css. So at the top of the CSS we have a couple of imported URLs here. So these are Google fonts. So the first thing that we're going to reference following the Google fonts, and if you want to get your own Google fonts, just go ahead and do a Google search for Google fonts. First thing that we're going to reference is called a reset style for the HTML document itself using an asterisk symbol, and we're just going to get rid of any inherent margin and padding here. And then we'll add box sizing border box. So this is going to give us more control along with margin and padding 0, so we can use up 100% of the browser using this little style fix here. So now let's go ahead and drop down, and the next thing that we're going to style is going to be the HTML document and the body section of the website. So let's go over here, and here we have our HTML tag, and then we have the body tag, and we're gonna do some styles that will apply to everything in our layout. So we're gonna give it a height of 100%. We're gonna give it a background of white, which is the hex value FFF, and then we're going to tell the text to align center. Okay, and then we want to give it a font. So we're going to give it a font size of 1.15 M or EM, and then we're going to give it a line height of 1, and then the font family that we'll use is Open Sans, and this will be for our paragraph text from the Google fonts, and then our backup font is Sans Serif. And after this we'll just give a color for our font, which is going to be white. So write color and then hex value FFF, and then let's take a look at what happens when we refresh the page. Alright, so there we have everything lining up nicely and in the center here. We still have to work on our images a little bit, but we see the text and the smaller images lining up in the center, as well as our links that we'll see at the bottom for our social icons and follow us in Flexi text. So next, we're going to add the wrapper style. Go ahead and just pause the screen for a second if you need to, because I messed up the recording a little bit here, and add the style for the wrapper. So let me just go ahead and there we go. Okay, so just go ahead and add that style for the wrapper there, which is going to span up the entire page similar to HTML and body. So we just gave it a simple background color of off-white. And remember, for classes we have the period before wrapper. For IDs we have the hex value, or the hashtag rather. So we're going to give the header where the Flexi logo is the same background color as the kite image, which is AFDED4. And now let's refresh. Okay, and there we have our background color, and then let's give our logo a little bit of padding. We want to create a little space for it. So right here we have our logo class. So we'll reference that again with a period for classes rather than the hashtag for IDs. So write dot logo or period logo, and then we'll give it a padding of 2% all around, which will take care of the top, bottom, and left, right, which we just really need our left, right. So if I refresh, so 15 pixel padding, that's about 2%. Let's just go ahead and change that. Okay, and refresh. So that's about the same. Okay, so that's good. Alright, so now let's drop down, and I just want to take a look here at how it looks on the mobile version as compared to the padding that we had there. So later we'll change it so the logo is a little bit smaller on the mobile version. But for now, let's go ahead and take care of our images. So let's drop down and reference our images with IMG, and we want to give our images a maximum width so they're not off of the screen. So starting with our kite image, and then we'll see it take effect with other images that are off the screen. So it looks like we have about 3 here in total. So write IMG, open and close your swirly brackets, and then we'll give it a max width of 100%. Okay, so let's refresh, and there we have our kite image. We have the paper airplane image, and then the airplane image at the very bottom, staying within our screen. So it's starting to look pretty good and staying within the size or width of the browser that we designate. Okay, so next let's drop down and let's take care of this dark text here, or the text that we want to change from light to dark. So we'll reference that with our heading 2 tag. So h2.dark for the dark class, or h2 class dark, and then we're going to give this the same dark blue color as the airplane section down here. Okay, so that's going to be the hex value 34495E. Alright, so if we refresh, there we have our welcome to Flexi text in the dark text version. And now let's go ahead and apply the Railway Google font to it. So we're going to style all of our heading 2 text here. Okay, so we're going to give this a font weight of 300, which is a light, thin font. We're going to give it a size of 2 EM, which is about 32 pixels, the line height of 1, and then we'll give it the Railway font with a backup font of sans serif. Then we'll give it the color white with a padding of 2% all around. But let's refresh it first. Okay, so there we have it in the Railway, and a little bit larger it appears. And then we'll give it the padding here. And then let's give it, okay, if we refresh, there we have a little more padding. Okay, So now we're going to make it center inside of our section. So as you can see with all this, no matter how wide or narrow we flex it, it's always going to be centered. So we're going to use some cool styling here to center it, which may be new to you. So let's go back to our style sheet here, and we're going to say position relative top 50%, and then transform translate y minus 50%. So this is going to center it. So we go top 50% and then minus 50%. So now if we refresh it, we're looking pretty good here. So let's drop down to the social media section. And I actually forgot to give up some space here. Okay, so we'll reference our social class here. And this is going to be .social and list style type none. So that's going to take away the dots. So we have no dots here for our list items. And then display inline for social LI. Okay, and then let's style the icons themselves after we have them lined up here in line. So we'll reference that with .social I, and then we're going to give them a font size of 3M, and then we'll want to space them out. So we'll give it a margin of 1% and a padding of 5%, and then we'll give it the background color, which is going to be white. Okay, so that spaces them out quite nicely here. And then color, FFF for white. Okay, and then refresh. So now let's add our hover color here. So drop down and write .social I : hover. And then we'll give it a color of hex value F6 931E. Okay, and then lastly, let's just style the paragraph text at the very bottom for our socket section with the copyright symbol, and we'll give that a padding of 2%. Okay, so now we're looking pretty good before we add any of our media query styles. Okay, so let's drop down underneath the paragraph style here and create our media query section. So what I'm going to do is create a quick comment here in our CSS just saying that our media queries are now starting. So the first media query that we're going to lay out is going to change our heading to text and the social icons at the bottom, and we're going to give this a max width of 900 pixels. So write at media all and in parentheses max width 900 pixels. So once we flex the website down to that mark, we're going to have the change in the heading to and icons. So let's take a look at the finished version here so you can see what I'm talking about when we reach the 900 pixel mark here. So I'll just flex it down a little bit. And there we have the change in the heading to text and the icons. So now let's go back over to the version that we've been working on and get started with the changes to the heading to style. So just write H2, open and close the swirly brackets, and then we're going to give it a font size which is smaller than the original. So the original was 2 EM, so let's go with 1.5. Okay. And now let's drop down and do our social icons. And we're going to change that from 3 to 2 EM. So now let's drop down and create our media query that's specifically for our Flexbox grid row and columns. So we're going to do media all and min or minimum width 768 pixels. So media all and min width 768 pixels. Then open and close your swirly brackets. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll call to our row class, and we're going to tell it to display flex, and we're going to give it a margin of 0. So if you want to add margin in between the rows, you can do it here, and then when we refresh, there we have it displaying as rows, but it's kind of messy because we didn't add our columns yet. Alright. So everything's kind of pushed off to the side. Let's add the margin 0 now. And then refresh. Okay, and we still have this line underneath the plain image there, which we'll take care of in just a moment. Okay, so now let's go back to our style sheet here, and what we're going to do is address our columns now. So before we lay out the columns individually, say column 3 or column 11, what we're going to do is we're going to create a quick style here that will make it so there's no margin for the last column in a row. So go ahead and we're going to create or add some brackets here. So go ahead and add your brackets, and then inside of it we'll write class asterisk equals in quotations column dash, and then colon last dash child, and then open and close your swirly brackets, and we're just going to give it margin 0, so the last column in a row has 0 margin added to it, and it floats sort of all the way to the side of the screen. Now let's add our individual columns. So I'm just going to add column 1 here, and then we'll add some that will change our layout. So we'll add column dash 1 flex 1. Alright, so now if we refresh, we're not really using that, that column 1. But what we'll do next to really take effect here is let's skip down and we'll do column 12, which we have for a lot of our sections here, and then we'll do flex 12. And this is going to make our full width sections display just as we want them to. Okay, so there we have our full width sections with the images especially laying out nicely for us, and the sections at the very bottom. Okay, so now let's go ahead and just add a couple more of the columns that we've used in our layout here. So let's do column -3, and then we'll do column -11 so we can see how they take effect here. So right, column 3, flex 3. And then if we refresh, there we have our column 3s, and now let's do column 11. And this will lay out all of our color sections and images off to the right. So here we have our column 11 and then column 3 underneath it. So now refresh. Okay, so there we have them, but they're not yet lining up like the stairway that we want them to. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to lay out all of the columns in our CSS, and then we'll come back to the HTML and change them so we get the stairway feel going down sort of stairs in the opposite direction with the images off to the right hand side. Okay, so let's go back over here, and I'm going to kind of fly through this. We're just going to lay out all of the columns 1 through 12 that we're missing here. So we have column and flex 2, and then I'll just do column 4 to 10 really quickly here. Alright, so I'll lay these out really quickly here, sped up, and then we'll go back and let's experiment with the different flex sections. So if we refresh it, we're not going to see any change here because we're not using any other flexes other than the 3, 11, and 12 right now. But what we'll do is let's go back to our HTML document here, and I'm actually just going to add a background color to get rid of that line there that's above the follow us text. So for the row with the plain dash background image, go ahead and just add that background color with 66DF or 66D4FF to get rid of that line. And now let's go up and we can experiment with the Flexbox grid sections here. Okay, so let's make our way up to the column 11, the first one. So if we drop down under that, what we're going to do is we'll descend from there. So we'll leave that column as 11, but we'll want to drop down to the next one and make it 10. So just change that to div class column 10. The next we'll make div class column 9, and that's going to start to create the stair section here. So column 9, then column 8, and then column 7. Okay, so now if we refresh, there we have our sort of stairs laid out with the Flexbox grid sections. Alright, so let's go back over to our style sheet now and drop down, and we'll create the next media query. So go over to style.css and we'll drop down and we'll create a media query that's similar to this last one, but instead of having it as the minimum width, we'll have it as max width 768 pixels. So go ahead and change minimum to max. Okay. So this is going to take effect when we get down to, say, an iPad width or an iPad mini, as well as cell phones. So here's what we have working with for the version we're working on the mobile version right now. And let's start from the top. So the first thing that will change will be the logo. So let's just reference that with dot logo for the logo class, and we'll change the max width to 185 pixels, down from, I believe it's around 220 pixels for the full width version. And then the next thing that we'll reference are our heading 2 fonts. So we'll give them a font size of 1.25 EM, padding of 3% all around, and then if we refresh, there we have them. The heading 2's a little bit smaller, looking kind of nice for us here. And if we refresh this version, actually, let's go up a little bit here. I think I missed something in the original heading 2 text or style. So transform, I just forgot an S, so that will help center it. Okay, so refresh, and now we're centered for the full width. So for the mobile version now, it's not going to be centered, but we'll correct that. So let's go back down to our media query for the 768 pixel max width, and we'll want to add that transform translate Y from negative 50% to just 0%. Okay, and then refresh, and now we have our heading 2 text centered for the mobile version. Alright, so the next thing that we'll do is let's drop down and let's style our paragraph text. So the flexi text at the very bottom, we're just going to make that a little bit smaller, and then we'll do one last media query for the social icons at the bottom, which are too large right now for the mobile version. So write P to reference the paragraph text, and then we'll give it a font size of 0.9 EM. So whoops, that didn't really change anything. I'm just going to change this from font to font size. And so that should be around 14 or 15 pixels. Okay, so now what we want to do is we'll want to make these images, the circle images, just as they appear in the finished version. So what we'll do is we'll take advantage of that circle class that we added to the images and round off these images that have the colored backgrounds. Okay, so drop down and let me just show you the class we're referencing. So here we have the circle class for those images, and write dot circle for the circle class open and close your brackets, and then we'll give it a border radius of 50%, and that's going to make it a circle. Okay, and then we'll want to have it have a max width so it doesn't take up the whole section there. So we'll give it a max width of 40%. So that looks a little better there, especially when we size it down to the phone or mobile version. And then we'll just give it a little bit of padding on the top and bottom. So we'll give it a padding of 5% top bottom, 0 left right. Alright. Okay, so that's looking pretty good as we size it down here. And then what we'll do is we'll change the size of our social icons once we get down to the 500 pixel mark. So I'm just going to copy this media all and max width 768 pixels and change it to 500 pixels. Okay, and then to reference the social icons, just write social I, open and close your brackets, and we'll give it a font size of 1.25 em or em from the 2, which was for the 900 pixel mark. Okay, so now if we bring it up to full width, we'll size it down. It goes from 3 to 2 down to 1.25. And if you want to add more social icons, say a 6th, you can just adjust that so they don't bring themselves onto separate lines. Okay, so now let's refresh. And here we have the finished version that we've been working on all laid out for us. Okay, so that does it for the Flexbox Grid website tutorial. I want to thank you for sticking around. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you in the next video.